Beneath the smoke of wars that ended long ago, there are corridors history dares not illuminate. In those corridors lie fragments, half-burned papers, crates with numbers carved too deep to erase, flight logs with vanished destinations. They are shadows chained to silence, fragments of a story that has no ending and perhaps never will. Some say these relics were buried to keep the world safe from what they contained. Others whisper they were hidden because power prefers its secrets sealed. What was lost was not merely weapons or machines, but blueprints of possibility, visions of a world reshaped by hands unseen, ambitions carved into steel and mercury, into glass lenses and cold uranium. And yet, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of those forgotten rooms, the hum of engines that never landed, the whispers of men who knew too much. The archives may be locked, but the silence is far louder than any confession. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Caesar. In the final winter of the Third Reich, as the Soviet advance strangled Berlin from the east and Allied bombers darkened the skies over the Ruhr, the German Naval Command issued one last desperate order. Hidden in the labyrinth of Kriegsmarine records lies a directive dated 5th of December 1944, signed by Admiral Karl Dönitz himself, authorizing a clandestine voyage under the codename Operation Caesar. The mission fell to Kapitänleutnant Ralph Reimer Wolfram, commander of the Type XB submarine U-864, a mine-laying giant redesigned to carry a sealed payload that even most of his crew did not fully understand. At its core were 1857 steel flasks, each filled with liquid mercury bound for Japanese weapons laboratories in Manchuria, alongside sealed containers labeled Kreislauftriebwerk, turbine components for a new generation of jet engines. Attached intelligence memos suggest that blueprints for advanced radar systems and Messerschmitt Me 262 aerodynamic modifications were also stowed in reinforced chests. The goal was simple: prevent Japan's defeat by accelerating its technological leap and prolonging the war in the Pacific. British monitoring stations at Bletchley Park had intercepted fragments of Enigma traffic by mid-January 1945, suggesting a strategic cargo transfer to Axis partner. The decrypted messages were incomplete, but the references to Schiff Caesar triggered alarms. By February, the Royal Navy had positioned hunter-killer groups along the Norwegian coast. One particular submarine, HMS Venturer, under Lieutenant James Launders, received secret orders from the Admiralty: intercept and neutralize U-864 before it could escape into open waters. Launders was never given the full scope of the cargo, only that the target was a high-value transport vessel, priority elimination. On 9th February 1945, off the island of Fedje, sonar operators aboard Venturer detected intermittent acoustic signals that hinted at a submerged submarine changing depth erratically. Wolfram's crew had been instructed to remain undetected, yet engine trouble forced U-864 to surface briefly before diving again. For over 3 hours, the two submarines engaged in a deadly underwater hunt. Launders made the unprecedented decision to fire a spread of 4 torpedoes while submerged, calculating a firing solution never before attempted in submarine warfare. At least one torpedo struck true. The explosion was heard across the fjords, and Allied records state conclusively that U-864 was destroyed with all hands, sinking to a depth of 150 meters. That is the official version. The classified files suggest something else. Norwegian fishermen who reported hearing 2 explosions instead of 1 described flashes in different quadrants of the horizon. British after-action reports, preserved in Admiralty File ADM 199-2147, contain inconsistencies in the timestamps. Some signals intelligence summaries reference multiple U-boat contacts in the same vicinity, though only U-864 is listed in declassified inventories. This discrepancy has led researchers to propose that a second vessel, possibly U-859, or another unregistered transport submarine, operated as part of Caesar, slipping away under cover of the chaos. In 2003, Norwegian salvage teams located the wreck of U-864 off Fedje. The remains confirmed mercury flasks scattered across the seabed, corroding slowly into the marine ecosystem. Yet when cross-referenced with captured Kriegsmarine manifests, the number of recovered flasks fell hundreds short of the original tally. Equally missing were the sealed containers believed to hold turbine components. NATO dive records declassified in 2012 indicate irregular salvage activity in the area during the 1950s, but the responsible nation remains unidentified. Conspiracy researchers argue that both the United States and the Soviet Union may have secretly recovered parts of the cargo, incorporating German aeronautical designs into early jet and missile programs. Technical similarities between the Messerschmitt schematics and Soviet MiG-15 wing structures have been highlighted, though official archives deny direct lineage. Adding to the mystery is a cable dated 22 May 1945 from MI6 Field Station Oslo to London, marked ultra-secret, referencing Caesar materials in friendly custody. The document, heavily redacted, suggests that at least some portion of the submarine's load was not lost but redirected. Another OSS memorandum from Copenhagen in June 1945 makes veiled mention of atomic assistance, requests from Japanese intermediaries, fueling speculation that Operation Caesar's true scope went beyond jet engines and into nuclear research. Japan's wartime nuclear program, centered in Hungnam, Korea, collapsed before fruition, but scholars question whether foreign materials ever arrived to accelerate it. Survivor testimony is scarce. No crew of U-864 lived to tell their story, but family interviews conducted decades later describe hurried letters mentioning a voyage longer than any before and cargo sealed from our hands. Allied interrogations of captured Kriegsmarine officers in 1945, preserved in interrogation report CSDEC WA 1737, reference Caesar as one of several eastbound convoys ordered but not all completed. If true, U-864 may have been only one element in a broader logistical operation. During the Cold War, the wreck site remained under quiet surveillance. Norwegian naval archives contain patrol logs from 1967 referencing prohibited waters off Fedja, guarded for contamination risk. The contamination referred to the mercury payload leaking into local fisheries, but some suspect the warning served as cover for classified monitoring of salvage technology. In 1974, a British environmental report was inexplicably classified under the Official Secrets Act, raising further questions about what exactly had been retrieved from the wreck. The story of Operation Caesar lingers not because of what is known, but because of what remains hidden. The scattered flasks tell only part of the tale. The missing turbine schematics, the unaccounted salvage operations, and the silence of both Western and Soviet archives suggest that the submarine's mission did not end in the mud of the Norwegian seabed. Instead, pieces of its deadly cargo may have quietly re-emerged in the laboratories of Los Alamos, the test ranges of Kazakhstan, and the jet fighter hangars of Cold War air bases. Today, the wreck of U-864 remains sealed beneath a concrete sarcophagus to contain mercury leakage, a literal burial of a toxic secret. Yet questions endure. Why do British Admiralty files still withhold sections of the Ventura's patrol log? Why do Soviet naval archives omit any reference to Fedja, despite their obsessive cataloguing of German losses? And why does a simple cargo manifest show a deficit of over 400 flasks? For historians who seek answers, Operation Caesar is not just a footnote in the collapse of Nazi Germany. It is a lingering ghost of a war whose hidden cargo may have shaped the balance of power for decades after the guns of 1945 fell silent. Chapter 2. Shadows beneath the Wewelsburg fortress. Among the surviving ruins of the Third Reich, few structures provoke the same uneasy silence as Wewelsburg Castle, a 17th century fortress perched on a hill above the Weser River Valley in Westphalia. Official histories describe it as Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler's vanity project, a spiritual headquarters for his order, where officers participated in ceremonies and occult pageantry. But archival fragments buried in Soviet files and inconsistencies in Allied intelligence reports suggest that Wewelsburg housed something much more tangible, a classified research hub where weaponization of ideology, experimental technologies, and cultural manipulation were tested in ways that the world has never been allowed to see. Construction records held in Bundesarchiv Koblenz confirm that between 1939 and 1943, the SS assigned over 1,200 forced labourers from Sachsenhausen concentration camp to dig beneath the fortress, excavating new subterranean chambers. Local villagers recalled trucks arriving at night, covered with tarpaulins, escorted by armed guards. Witnesses reported seeing crates unloaded, stamped with Reichsadler seals and coded markings, such as Crystal A1 and Licht B7. Wartime aerial reconnaissance photos later studied by Allied analysts show fresh excavation scars in the castle's southern courtyard, scars that do not align with any surviving post-war floor plans. To this day, those sealed sublevels remain unexcavated, The secrecy extended beyond construction. An SS officer captured in Prague in May 1945, Untersturmführer Hans Brunn, told British interrogators that he had been assigned to Kulturforschung Abteilung W, a division allegedly tasked with archiving stolen manuscripts and artifacts. Yet his testimony also mentioned optische Versuche, optical, experiments linked to devices he described as lenses that could pierce night. This corresponds eerily with known SS research into infrared technology for sniper rifles and Panther tanks, technology which appeared suddenly in 1944 without explanation of its development pipeline. Some researchers now argue that the origins of such devices may lie in these hidden laboratories beneath Wewelsburg. In 1991, for a brief window after the collapse of the USSR, Soviet military archives released partial interrogation transcripts of captured SS scientists. One, identified as Dr. Ernst N., spoke of the Chamber of the Black Sun, a vaulted underground hall where acoustics and light projections were studied under orders from Himmler himself. Though the language was obscured by propaganda, the description included references to experiments combining acoustical resonance with projection systems, what intelligence officers at the time interpreted as early psychological warfare trials. The files were resealed by 1994. Western historians who attempted to access them have since been denied, the documents reclassified under Russian state security provisions. On the Allied side, the evidence is equally fragmented. In July 1945, the 83rd Infantry Division of the US Army occupied Wewelsburg. Photographs taken by Army Signal Corps personnel show stacks of books, confiscated archives, and ritualistic insignia. Yet one curious report, G2 Summary Number 37, mentions technical documents removed under priority handling by OSS Frankfurt. The report was redacted in subsequent copies, but a surviving draft in private hands notes crates marked Schattenlicht, literally shadow light. What became of those crates remains unclear. The OSS, precursor to the CIA, has no official inventory of such items in its declassified records. Further intrigue arises from discrepancies in denazification records. Several mid-level SS officers attached to Wewelsburg were slated for prosecution, but were quietly dropped from trial lists. Among them was Obersturmführer Otto Reiner, an engineer later traced to employment at Siemens in the 1950s, working in advanced optics. Researchers have noted similarities between wartime German infrared patents and early Cold War night vision systems tested by both NATO and Warsaw Pact armies. Whether these parallels represent direct continuity or coincidental development is debated, but the shadow of Wewelsburg looms large over the timeline. Local accounts add human weight to the mystery. Villagers of Niedentudorf recalled that in March 1945, as American artillery approached, trucks loaded with documents left the castle under heavy escort. The convoy vanished toward Paderborn, its fate unrecorded. Rumors persist of aircraft departing from Luftwaffe bases in the region, carrying cargo eastward as the Reich collapsed. Soviet accounts collected years later describe seized archives of German ethnological material arriving in Moscow, though the files lack precise provenance. The suggestion remains that Wewelsburg's most sensitive collections never fell into Western hands at all. For decades after the war, West German authorities restricted excavation beneath the castle, citing instability of the structure. In 1977, however, a civil engineer conducting surveys discovered blocked passages filled with concrete poured hastily, likely by retreating SS troops. Within the sealed sections were faint traces of wiring conduits, ventilation shafts, and structural supports inconsistent with normal architectural design. The engineer's report was filed with the local district office but disappeared. From archives by the 1980s, copies that surfaced later mention technical features beyond simple storage. Rooms. The narrative of Wewelsburg as a mere ideological shrine is thus difficult to reconcile with the scattered evidence. Why the secrecy surrounding its underground wings? Why did Allied intelligence prioritize confiscation of certain files before public officials even inspected the site? Why were Soviet reports so rapidly buried after their release? Each inconsistency deepens the suspicion that Wewelsburg was not only a ceremonial heart of the SS, but a crucible for experiments blending symbolism, propaganda, and emerging technologies in ways too uncomfortable for post-war governments to acknowledge. Environmental scans conducted in 2008 using ground-penetrating radar indicated cavities beneath the castle that remain inaccessible. Officially, local authorities describe them as collapsed cellars. Unofficially, independent researchers claim the shapes suggest vaulted rooms. Excavation requests have been denied on grounds of preservation. The rooms remain sealed, their contents, if any, entombed in silence. The story of Wewelsburg is ultimately not one of confirmed weapons or provable prototypes, but of absences, denials, and erasures. The castle stands today as a museum focusing on SS ideology, while beneath its floors lie the unanswered questions of vanished archives, missing crates, and sealed chambers. In every redacted file, in every withheld photograph, the shadow of something concealed grows larger. Perhaps it was nothing more than unfinished research, abandoned in the chaos of collapse. Or perhaps beneath the rituals and insignia, Himmler's fortress served as the hidden workshop of a regime determined to weaponize both science and belief, leaving behind traces too dangerous to acknowledge in the light of post-war memory. Chapter 3. The Forgotten Siege of Fortress Königstein. Fortress Königstein, perched on a sandstone plateau above the Elbe in Saxony, was considered impregnable for centuries. During the Second World War, German records list it primarily as Oflag 4B, a prisoner of war camp for captured officers, including several French generals. Official accounts describe orderly detentions and occasional escape attempts, but scattered field reports and incomplete intelligence summaries hint at a second role for the fortress in the war's final year. In the labyrinthine vaults carved deep into the rock, Allied researchers later suspected the Germans hid something more valuable than prisoners: archives, prototypes, and intelligence seized across Europe during 6 years of war. An OSS situation report dated 12th April 1945, coded XL311, noted increased encrypted traffic under call sign Schwarzfalken, emanating from Königstein sector. Analysts at Bletchley Park believed this to be a command post, but the site's location made little strategic sense, unless Königstein sheltered material the Reich intended to protect at any cost. Aerial reconnaissance conducted in March 1945 revealed unusually heavy flak emplacements for a site supposedly holding non-combatant prisoners. Subsequent analysis after the war showed that several gun positions were installed only weeks before Germany's surrender, suggesting last-minute defensive preparations. When Soviet forces advanced into Saxony in early May 1945, Königstein surrendered without a shot. The official Soviet report, filed by the 1st Guards Tank Army, mentions only the liberation of prisoners and the capture of minor German staff officers. Yet American intelligence officers stationed in nearby Torgau recorded that the Soviets imposed a cordon around the fortress for several days, denying even Allied liaison officers entry. A US Military Intelligence Division memorandum dated 28th of May 1945 states, "Fortress Königstein remains under exclusive Soviet jurisdiction. Reports of removal of crates by truck convoy noted but unverified. Soviet officers evasive." The convoy in question was observed by local villagers who recalled trucks driving through the night toward Dresden, their cargo covered with tarpaulins and guarded by NKVD escorts. Testimonies from German officers captured elsewhere reinforced the notion that Königstein held more than prisoners. In a CSDIC interrogation transcript from June 1945, Oberleutnant Klaus von Richter described hearing rumors of the vault inside the fortress where documents from downed Allied bombers were collected, including technical data and cipher material. He mentioned that Luftwaffe officers joked the British would someday regret what lay locked in the sandstone. The veracity of his statement was never confirmed, yet the remark was redacted from later declassified copies of the transcript. What little can be pieced together suggests the fortress became a clearinghouse for sensitive intelligence. A French officer imprisoned there in 1943, General Maurice Gamelin, later wrote in his memoirs of strange restrictions in certain sections of the fortress, where guards forbade prisoners from approaching sealed corridors. He recalled German engineers bringing in crates marked with both Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine insignia. At the time, he assumed they were supplies. In hindsight, his description matches that of technical files and recovered equipment being stored under guard. The mystery deepens with Soviet archival silence. When the Russian Federation briefly opened its military archives in the early 1990s, Western researchers combed through captured German records. Yet almost nothing from Königstein appeared. Historians familiar with the files noted that several registry numbers were skipped, implying entire collections had been removed before public access. Former Soviet archivist Dmitry Volkov later alleged in a 2001 interview that special shipments from Königstein were delivered to Moscow in May 1945 and classified indefinitely under state security provisions. Adding to the enigma are missing Allied files. An OSS report titled Evaluation of Enemy Documentation from Königstein is referenced in an internal index, but the report itself does not exist in declassified holdings. Likewise, US Army intelligence map annotations from June 1945 label Königstein as Category Red, a designation reserved for sites of extreme sensitivity, yet no follow-up reports are available. Whether the documents were destroyed, misplaced, or deliberately withheld remains unknown. Eyewitness accounts from the region suggest frantic activity in the fortress during the final weeks of the war. Residents of Königstein village reported smoke rising from the fortress chimneys in late April, as if records were being burned. Others remembered convoys of carts hauling sealed containers to the river, where barges took them downstream under heavy guard. No shipping manifests survive, and Soviet military river patrol logs for that period contain unexplained gaps. The fortress itself holds physical evidence of something concealed. When East German authorities reopened sections of Königstein in the 1960s, engineers discovered reinforced doors bricked over, leading to chambers not listed on official architectural plans. Access was denied, and the findings classified by the Ministry for State Security, Stasi. After reunification, German preservation authorities claimed the passages were too dangerous to excavate, citing risk of collapse. Ground-penetrating radar scans conducted by independent researchers in 2004 indicated anomalies beneath the central courtyard consistent with large voids, though excavation remains prohibited. Speculation about what was hidden at Königstein ranges from radar research to captured Allied codebooks, even early components of Germany's rocketry program. One British intelligence memorandum from 1946 hypothesized that files on the Reich's atomic research could have been stored there. The document noted, if such material reached Soviet hands intact, it may explain accelerated Russian progress in related fields. This line of reasoning remains controversial, yet the timing of Soviet advances in nuclear and missile technology raises uncomfortable parallels. To this day, Königstein stands as a museum, marketed as an imposing fortress with centuries of military history. Tourists walk its walls, unaware of the unresolved questions locked within. Beneath the exhibits of Napoleonic prisoners and Wehrmacht rations lie chambers that may have once held the Reich's most sensitive war files, stripped and erased by Soviet hands before Allied investigators could intervene. The surviving record is defined by gaps, reports that reference missing attachments, testimonies that were redacted, aerial photos that vanished from official collections. The forgotten siege of Königstein was bloodless, but its consequences echo. If archives truly were hidden there, they may have been among the most valuable trophies of the war, quietly shaping the intelligence race of the Cold War. Whether it was codebooks, experimental communications equipment, or entire libraries of stolen Allied material, the contents of Königstein's vaults remain buried in secrecy. The silence surrounding the fortress is not the silence of neglect, but of deliberate omission. In the words of one OSS officer, scribbled in the margin of a surviving cable, what was taken from Königstein may never be returned, not to history, not to truth. Chapter 4. The Silent War of Project Alsos. In the collapsing months of the Third Reich, a little-known Allied mission codenamed Alsos was launched to gather intelligence on German nuclear and advanced weapons research. The official history frames Alsos as a straightforward scientific recovery operation, a race to capture physicists like Werner Heisenberg and documents from facilities in Strasbourg, Haigerloch, and Hechingen. Yet close examination of field diaries, redacted OSS reports, and missing military archives reveals another story. A shadow war fought not only between Allies and Axis, but among the Allies themselves, each scrambling to seize or suppress discoveries that could shift the balance of power in the post-war world. The first phase began in Italy, 1943, when Colonel Boris Pash, an American military intelligence officer, led teams to secure suspected nuclear laboratories. Official records state that little of value was found. Yet a report from November 1943 mentions the confiscation of sensitive metallurgical samples shipped to undisclosed US facilities. From the outset, Alsos was less a scientific expedition than a covert race, driven by fear that Germany was close to achieving a functioning atomic device. As the Allies pushed into France in 1944, Alsos personnel moved with combat units, often arriving at research sites hours after liberation. However, field logs repeatedly describe instances where the laboratories were already stripped bare. One telling case occurred in Strasbourg in November 1944. Allied forces secured the University of Strasbourg's Physics Institute, expecting to find uranium stockpiles and experimental reactors. Instead, they found empty shelves, missing laboratory equipment, and fragmented notes. Colonel Pasha's report to OSS headquarters described precise removal, executed days before Alsos arrived. Witness testimony from local staff hinted at men in unmarked uniforms taking crates at night, speaking fluent German but issuing orders in accented English. The implication was troubling. Rival Allied units, operating outside official command, may have looted the sites. The report was classified at the time and remains heavily censored today. The same pattern repeated in southern Germany. In March 1945, Alsos targeted the research complex in Haigerloch, where German scientists were experimenting with a uranium pile beneath a church. The Alsos team captured Heisenberg's notebooks, uranium cubes, and the remains of the makeshift reactor. Yet later accounts from soldiers attached to the 1269th Engineer Combat Battalion mention foreign personnel removing crates before Alsos's arrival, loading them onto trucks without insignia. Some suspected they were Soviet agents operating ahead of the front line. Others believed they were British or even American special units, bypassing Alsos's chain of command. Either way, the official inventories of captured material fail to match eyewitness reports of what was actually taken. OSS communications, intercepted by later historians, reinforce the suspicion of competing agendas. A cable dated 2 April 1945, originating from the SOE, Special Operations Executive Station in Bern, references independent procurement of atomic documentation to prevent American monopolization. Though vague, the wording suggests British operatives conducted parallel seizures to ensure London retained leverage in post-war negotiations. American files show irritation at British interference, with Pash himself noting in his diary, "Our partners prove as obstructive as the enemy. The race is not against Berlin alone." This phrase was redacted in published versions of his memoirs. The most controversial accounts come from German physicists interrogated after the war. Karl Wirtz, part of Heisenberg's team, testified that their work was seized twice, first by Americans in uniform, and again by unidentified parties who claimed authority higher than Washington. When pressed, he described vehicles without markings whose personnel carried forged documentation. His testimony was dismissed as confusion under duress, yet similar descriptions appear in 3 other post-war interrogations preserved in C-stick reports. Whether these unidentified parties were rogue Allied units, black market operatives, or Soviet infiltrators remains unresolved. Adding weight to the theory of multiple actors is the peculiar post-war fate of several German scientists. While Heisenberg and Otto Hahn were interned in England under Operation Epsilon, others such as Kurt Diebner and Paul Hartek were quietly absorbed into classified projects. Diebner, formerly barred from research under denazification, appears in obscure US Army files in 1946 as a consultant. Meanwhile, Soviet archives confirm that physicists like Nicholas Riehl were transferred to the USSR, where they contributed to the Soviet atomic program. How these scientists were divided between victors reflects not just capture, but prior negotiations. Negotiations that could only have occurred if their value was recognized before the war officially ended. Evidence of material transfers also complicates the narrative. In July 1945, US forces transported 1,200 tons of uranium ore from Stassfurt to Antwerp, later shipped to America. This operation is well documented. Less well known are references in Alsos shipping manifests to classified packages, non-inventoried. Historian Thomas Powers noted that at least 14 sealed containers reached US ports without description, their contents still unknown. A parallel Soviet convoy removed uranium stockpiles from eastern German mines, some of which directly fueled their first atomic bomb. Whether these convoys also carried documents or prototypes acquired from Königstein or Haigerloch remains speculation. The secrecy surrounding Alsos deepened during the Cold War. Many files were destroyed or withheld under the pretext of national security. British records on Alsos remain sealed until at least 2045. While American archives contain gaps where entire folders have been removed. A 1952 CIA internal memo titled Legacy of Alsos admitted the project achieved mixed results. Not all recovered materials were acknowledged. Competing efforts by allies and adversaries alike created duplications, omissions, and deliberate obfuscation. The true scope may never be reconstructed. Such admissions are rare, yet they confirm that official histories were sanitized. For those searching the shadows of Alsos, the silence itself becomes evidence. Why do American archives omit details of the Strasbourg seizures? Why were Heisenberg's notes published decades later only in edited form? Why did Soviet archives that briefly opened in the 1990s contain references to German reactor components from unknown Western sources? The pattern suggests that the story of Alsos was never a single mission, but a contested battleground where allies looted the wreckage of the Reich, not just to win a war, but to prepare for the Cold War that followed. Today, Alsos is remembered in textbooks as a successful safeguard against a German atomic bomb, but the deeper record reveals a murkier picture. Laboratories stripped before capture, scientists divided in secret, documents erased or redirected, all point to a hidden contest of priorities. It was not only about stopping Hitler, it was about ensuring who would control the future of nuclear science once Germany fell. In that sense, Alsos was not a mission of closure, but of transition, a bridge from one global conflict to another. The silence that cloaks it is the silence of governments unwilling to admit that victory in 1945 was followed immediately by a quieter, more insidious war fought in laboratories, archives, and underground vaults across a ruined continent. Chapter 5. Ghost Flights of Operation Lusty. As the Third Reich collapsed in spring 1945, Allied commands launched a classified effort known as Operation Lusty, short for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. Its stated purpose was the capture and transfer of German aircraft, designs, and aeronautical expertise to the United States. The public record highlights famous trophies: the Messerschmitt Me 262 jet, the Arado R-234 bomber, and prototypes of rocket interceptors. Yet beneath this official narrative lies a more elusive history, one marked by missing cargo manifests, unlogged flights, and whispers of entire squadrons disappearing into the post-war night skies, flights that became known among intelligence officers as the Ghosts of Lusty. The operation was overseen by Colonel Harold Watson and his group of test pilots nicknamed Watson's Whizzes. They were tasked with locating advanced aircraft, hidden in hangars across Bavaria, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. Declassified U.S. Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC, files confirm that dozens of intact jets were flown from German airfields to Lechfeld, then dismantled and shipped to Wright Field in Ohio. Yet discrepancies appear immediately in the paperwork. A May 1945 ATIC manifest lists 46 airframes recovered, while only 34 appear in the Wright Field receiving log. The missing 12 have never been accounted for. Eyewitness testimony from Luftwaffe personnel hints at parallel seizures. A mechanic captured at Innsbruck reported that in late April 1945, a column of trucks loaded with Arado fuselages departed at night under guard by American soldiers, without insignia. The convoy bypassed Lechfeld entirely, heading south towards Switzerland. Neutral Swiss observers later filed reports of unusual aircraft parts crossing the border disguised as industrial equipment. These files were sealed in Bern for decades and only surfaced in 1999 through diplomatic leaks. What became of the parts remains unclear. Flight records also show irregularities. Captain Fred McIntosh, one of Watson's Whizzes, logged a ferry flight of an Me-262 to Cherbourg on 10th June 1945. The aircraft was meant for shipment to the US, yet no such plane appears in the final tally. British records, however, mention the arrival of an Me-262 at Farnborough around the same date, acquired through undisclosed arrangements. Whether the aircraft was diverted deliberately or quietly traded remains unanswered. Such diversions were not isolated. Similar anomalies appear in Soviet archives, which reference jet components of unknown Western origin delivered to Moscow in late 1945. The pattern suggests a clandestine redistribution of captured technology. While Operation Lusty's official purpose was scientific, its hidden role may have been political, to divide the spoils of German aviation among allies while concealing the extent of transfers from public knowledge. The Americans were not alone in this. British intelligence mounted parallel missions under Operation Surgeon, while the Soviets conducted their own seizures in eastern Germany. In this chaotic overlap, aircraft and data vanished into competing channels, leaving incomplete records deliberately obscured to avoid diplomatic confrontation. A particularly haunting element of Lusty lies in accounts of unmarked flights departing from Bavarian airstrips in May 1945. Local villagers near Kaufbeuren recalled hearing jet engines at night after the official surrender. Though no such flights appear in US Air Force records, a Luftwaffe officer later interrogated by the Soviets claimed that a handful of advanced prototypes, including the Horten Ho 229 flying wing, were flown out under American guard and never publicly acknowledged. While the US Air Force displayed fragments of a Ho 229 decades later, no complete prototype was ever admitted into their custody. Whether entire airframes vanished into clandestine testing programs is left to speculation. Further evidence of concealed transfers comes from pilot testimony. In a 1960 oral history interview, former WWII Lieutenant Bob Strobel hinted that not everything we flew went where people think. When pressed, he referred to private flights ordered by intelligence officers rather than Air Force Command. Though vague, his words match other accounts of planes ferried to undisclosed depots before reaching Wright Field. Some historians suggest these flights supplied early American stealth and jet programs, while others argue they were part of covert exchanges with foreign governments. The Soviets too seemed aware of the missing pieces. A 1946 NKVD report cited incomplete American accounting of jet prototypes and noted that certain designs appear to have bypassed declared inventories. Within a few years, Soviet engineers unveiled the MiG-9 and MiG-15, designs bearing uncanny resemblance to German jets. Officially, the Soviets credited their own research, but the speed of development raised suspicions that undocumented technology, perhaps from the ghost flights, had changed hands without acknowledgement. By the 1950s, Operation Lusty faded from public memory, replaced by sanitized narratives of Allied scientific triumph. Museums displayed Me-262s and Focke-Wulf prototypes as trophies, but behind closed doors, archives tell of cargo manifests blacked out, photographs removed, and entire serial numbers omitted from records. When researchers petitioned for access in the 1980s, the Air Force declassified only selected files, many stamped with pages removed for security reasons. The missing pages correspond precisely to the aircraft unaccounted for in 1945. The legend of the ghost flights persists because of these silences. Were they simply clerical errors, or did entire convoys and aircraft disappear into black projects and covert alliances? The fragmented evidence points to the latter. Neutral airspace violations, Swiss customs reports, and Soviet memoranda converge on a single theme. Operation Lusty was not a clean sweep of German aviation technology, but a smuggling network cloaked in the language of science. What began as a hunt for jets ended as a geopolitical auction. Today, the phrase Watson's Whizzers evokes images of daring pilots ferrying enemy jets to Allied airfields. But within classified corridors, their flights became symbols of something more troubling, a scramble not only to end a war, but to shape the next one. Operation Lusty's ghosts still linger in the missing manifests, in the unmarked convoys that vanished into mountain passes, and in the prototypes that appeared suddenly in Cold War hangars on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The silence of official records ensures the story remains unfinished, a riddle where the only certainty is that not every flight landed where history says it did. In the silence after the guns, history promised an ending, but endings are illusions. Somewhere in locked vaults and unmarked files, fragments of the past remain alive, buried but not forgotten, erased but never destroyed. The world walks forward, unknowing, while in the shadows lie unspoken debts and unclaimed truths, smouldering like embers beneath ash. What is hidden is not only knowledge, but the cost of its concealment, a quiet ledger of fear, ambition, and betrayal. Perhaps the real story was never meant for daylight, only for whispers that drift across abandoned runways, sealed bunkers, and corridors of stone where no one dares to tread. And so the echoes endure, reminding us that in every victory hides a secret, and in every silence hides a warning. The question is not whether the truth exists, but how long it can stay buried before the shadows decide to speak.